The wind howled across the wall, carrying a chill that made even hardened men shiver. Jon Snow stood on top, his black cloak whipping behind him. Ever since he became Lord Commander, the weight on his shoulders had only grown heavier. Wildlings, the Night's Watch, the whispers about the White Walkers, all of it filled his mind. But there was something else too. A feeling, a pull. He had dreams lately, strange ones. A woman standing in fire, dragons flying across the sky. Her eyes were sharp, her voice fierce, but there was something about her that felt familiar. He didn't know who she was, but she called to him. And then came Samwell Tarly, holding an old scroll. "Jon," he said, eyes wide, "this speaks of a Targaryen queen across the narrow sea, Daenerys Stormborn. She's taken cities in Slaver's Bay, freed slaves, conquered Meereen. She has dragons, Jon, real ones." Jon's heart beat faster. A Targaryen, the name itself felt electric. Maybe it was just a story, maybe not. But something inside him whispered, "You need to find her." The Night's Watch needed him. The North was in chaos. But Jon had always followed what felt right, even when it cost him friends or honor. "I need to leave," he told Sam one night. "Not forever. But I have to know if the woman in my dreams, the queen with dragons, is real. If she is, she might be the key to saving us all." Sam didn't argue. He just nodded, though his eyes were sad. "Then go. I'll cover for you as long as I can." And so, without telling many, Jon left Castle Black in the dead of night. Ghost padded beside him, silent as snowfall. He took a ship from Eastwatch, headed for Essos, heart full of questions, but one goal clear: to find the Dragon Queen. It took weeks to sail across the narrow sea. Storms hit them hard, and Ghost growled every time the ship rocked too violently. But Jon didn't care. He couldn't stop thinking about the dreams, the fire, the dragons, the woman who looked at him like she knew his soul. In Meereen, the city was tense. People still hated the Unsullied. Some wanted the old slave ways back. Daenerys Targaryen, the breaker of chains, ruled from the Great Pyramid, but not all loved her. Jon arrived at the gates, dressed in a black cloak, sword at his side, hair wild from the sea. The guards looked at him with suspicion. "I'm here to speak with the Queen," Jon said. "Who are you?" He hesitated. "Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, from Westeros." They laughed. "What's a man of the Night's Watch doing in Meereen?" But word reached Daenerys quickly. A Westerosi man, claiming to be from the Wall, with a direwolf by his side. That alone made her curious. She sat on her throne when he entered. Her silver hair glowed in the sunlight, her dragons watching from above. Jon stood tall, but his eyes met hers, and both of them paused. "I know you," Daenerys said slowly. "I've seen you. In dreams." Jon blinked. "So have I." The silence was thick. "I came to find you," he said. "I believe the war that's coming, it's not just about thrones, it's about survival. And I think you're the only one who can help." Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "Why should I trust a man from the Night's Watch?" He stepped forward. "Because I don't want your crown. I don't want power. I only want to stop what's coming. The dead march in the north, and your dragons may be the only thing that can stop them." Daenerys stared at him. His words were honest, pure, and strange as it was. Something about him felt like fate. Daenerys didn't answer right away. She watched Jon Snow with sharp, questioning eyes, the kind that had seen too many betrayals, too many lies. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, the cold of the north still clinging to his bones, Ghost sitting beside him like a silent shadow. The throne room felt heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional growl of one of her dragons above. Finally she spoke. "You cross oceans to bring me tales of walking corpses, and I'm supposed to believe that?" "I didn't come to make you believe," Jon replied, steady. I came to tell you what's real. The army of the dead is real. They've already breached the north, and if they make it past the wall, Essos won't be far behind. Tyrion Lannister, standing beside the throne, leaned in. He speaks of white walkers, ancient tales from the north, children's stories. Jon looked at him sharply. They're not stories. I've fought them. I've killed one. Daenerys raised her eyebrows. You've killed one? With dragonglass, he nodded. And fire. They fear it, just like your dragons. Now that caught her interest. You think I should bring my dragons north? She asked, almost amused. Leave Meereen a city still hanging by a thread, just because a stranger tells me death is coming? Jon stepped closer. I think if you don't, everything you've built here, everything you're fighting for, will be ashes by the time it reaches Westeros. She studied him. His voice wasn't begging. It wasn't proud either. It was just tired, like someone who'd seen too much death already. She turned to Missandei. Prepare a guest room for him. He's not going anywhere until I get more answers. And so, Jon Snow stayed. The next few days were strange. Meereen was unlike anything he had ever seen. Streets full of color and music. People who'd once been slaves now walked free, but freedom hadn't healed everything. There were whispers in the alleys. Anger. Some still wanted Daenerys dead. And everywhere Jon went, people stared. They'd never seen a man in black from the north, with a ghostly white direwolf at his heels. But what caught Jon's attention most wasn't the city. It was her, Daenerys. She wasn't what he expected. Fierce, yes. Proud, but not cruel. She spoke softly to children, but ruled like fire. She asked questions, clever ones. And when she looked at him, it was like she saw through every mask he'd ever worn. One evening, they stood alone on the pyramid, watching her dragons fly through the red sky. You care for them, Jon said quietly. They're the only children I'll ever have, Daenerys replied. They were born in fire. Like me, Jon looked at her. They'll be needed in the cold, too. She didn't smile. You really believe in all this, don't you? The Night King, the army of the dead. I've seen them, Jon whispered. And when you see them, everything else seems small. Daenerys turned to him. You think I'm part of your war, that my dragons are weapons for the north? Jon shook his head. No. I think you're a queen who can do what others won't. I think you're the only one who might listen, before it's too late. She watched him carefully. And what about you? You say you're a bastard, a man of the watch, no family, no house. What drives you? He paused. I used to think it was honor, duty. Now, I just don't want to watch more people die when we can stop it. Their eyes met again. This time, she didn't look away. Far below, in the alleys of Meereen, a shadow moved. A hooded figure slipped past guards, unnoticed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a black, curved dagger obsidian, dark as night. The sons of the Harpy had returned, and they'd heard of the man from Westeros, the one who came with the wolf. They didn't want the Dragon Queen distracted. Jon Snow would have to die before he turned her heart north. The moon hung low over Meereen, casting long shadows across the sandstone streets. Torches flickered along the walls of the Great Pyramid, and the city seemed calm, too calm. Inside, Jon Snow couldn't sleep, not because of the heat or the foreign smells that filled the air, but because something in his gut felt wrong. Ghost paced silently near the door, ears twitching. Jon sat up, grabbing Longclaw from the side of the bed. The sword's cold weight was familiar, comforting. He moved to the window, looking out over the city. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. There was something beneath it, a tension, like a storm just out of sight. Elsewhere in the pyramid, Daenerys sat in her chamber, going over messages with Missandei. Her mind wasn't on the parchments, though. It kept drifting back to the man from the north. His eyes, his voice, the weight of everything he carried. He was unlike any man she'd known, humble yet fierce, honest yet mysterious. She didn't trust him fully, not yet, but she didn't doubt his belief, and something in her wanted to believe him. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the halls. Then another, short, sharp, cut off too fast. Jon was already on his feet before the third scream. Ghost growled low, hair bristling. Jon pushed open the door and saw a body slumped at the corner, one of the Unsullied, throat slit clean. Blood pooled beneath him. "Ghost, stay with me," Jon hissed, and the direwolf obeyed instantly. Jon moved fast, sword drawn, heart pounding. The halls were too quiet now. No footsteps, no shouting, just silence and the smell of blood. Another corner, another dead Unsullied. Then he saw them, 3 men in gold masks, slipping like shadows toward the Queen's chamber. Jon didn't wait. He ran. "Daenerys!" he shouted, voice cutting through the halls. Inside, she looked up, startled. Before her guards could react, the door burst open, and one of the sons of the Harpy lunged in. But Jon was faster. Long claw sliced through the air, crashing into the assassin's blade. Steel rang, sparks flew. Ghost leapt forward and tackled another attacker, tearing into his arm with a savage growl. Daenerys backed toward the wall, her eyes wide as chaos exploded in her chamber. Missandei screamed as a blade came toward her, but Grey Worm rushed in just in time, slamming the assassin to the ground. Jon fought like a man possessed. His blade was a blur, blocking, slashing, dodging. One masked man tried to flank him, but Ghost leapt again, dragging the man down by the throat. Blood sprayed the walls. The last of the attackers lunged straight for Daenerys, dagger raised. "Khaleesi!" Grey Worm shouted, but Jon was there. He threw himself between her and the blade. The dagger sliced across his ribs, burning hot, but his sword didn't stop. With a brutal roar, Jon drove Longclaw through the assassin's chest. The man fell, gasping, mask cracking in half. Then it was over. Jon staggered back, blood running from his side. He dropped to one knee, gripping his wound. Ghost whined beside him. Daenerys rushed forward. "Jon!" He looked up at her, breathing hard. "You all right?" She nodded, her face pale. Why did you come?" "I heard the screams," he muttered. "Couldn't let you die, not tonight." She reached down and helped him to his feet. "You're hurt." "I've had worse," he said, though his teeth clenched from the pain. Grey Worm stood beside the bodies, his face hard. "Sons of the Harpy. They knew he was here. They tried to kill both of you." Daenerys looked down at the masked corpses. "They failed." She turned back to Jon. Their eyes locked again, but something had shifted. The doubt in her gaze had faded. What stood there now was something stronger. Trust. "You saved my life," she said softly. "And you still don't know if I'm mad?" Jon smirked, though his lips were pale from blood loss. "No," she said, stepping closer. "I think you're the first person who's told me the truth in a very long time." Outside, the city was beginning to stir. Alarms rang. More Unsullied poured into the halls. But inside the chamber, everything had already changed. The Dragon Queen and the bastard of Winterfell were no longer strangers. They were survivors of the same war, and in the darkness ahead, they would need each other more than either of them yet understood. The sun rose over Meereen like blood on the horizon, casting a red glow across the city that still smelled of last night's violence. Word of the attack had spread fast. The people were shaken, the Unsullied were on edge, and the Sons of the Harpy had made one thing clear: they were far from finished. Jon sat in a quiet chamber as Missandei cleaned the wound on his ribs. It burned, but he said nothing, jaw tight, eyes distant. Ghost lay nearby, watching the door like a shadow waiting to strike again. "You're lucky," Missandei said softly. A few inches deeper, and you would have—" John interrupted. He wasn't trying to scare her. He was trying to kill her. Missandei paused, nodding. "They want the Queen alone. Isolated. Easier to destroy." John looked up. "They're making a mistake. She's not alone anymore." Daenerys entered the room just then, her footsteps light but certain. She wore a dark blue robe, her silver hair tied back, and her expression was different now, less guarded. There was no need for titles or ceremony between them anymore. Blood had already broken that wall. "How's the wound?" she asked, walking over. "Hurts less than your dragon's stairs," John said, managing a crooked smile. She smiled faintly. "They like you. That's unusual. I guess they smell the north on me." Daenerys sat across from him. "The sons of the Harpy were watching you since the moment you arrived. They knew you were important. Even before I did." John shook his head. "I'm just a man with a sword and a warning." "No," she said. "You're more than that. You came from across the world with nothing to gain. You threw yourself between me and death, and still, you talk like you're no one." John looked away. "Maybe that's because I don't know who I really am." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then spoke. "I was born a bastard, raised as Ned Stark's son, but I'm not truly. And I've never known what that means, just that I've always felt wrong, like I don't belong anywhere." Daenerys looked at him, her voice soft. "Sometimes I wonder the same. I was born during a storm, smuggled across the sea. My family died before I could know them. All I had were stories and fire." He looked up at her again. "Then maybe we're both just ghosts, chasing things we've never had." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. In the silence between them, something deeper formed an understanding, raw and unspoken. But the moment didn't last. Grey Worm entered, face grim. "A message from Yunkai and Astapor. They refuse your rule. The old slavers are rising again. They're gathering ships." Daenerys stood, voice hardening. "They see Meereen weakened. They see the attack and think I'm losing grip. They plan to retake the bay," Grey Worm said, "with force." John stood, despite the pain in his side. "Then we don't wait. Strike first." Daenerys turned to him, surprised. "You speak like a commander." "I've fought battles," he said. "You don't wait for the enemy to knock. You meet them before they're ready." She stepped closer. "And if I asked you to stand with me, not just as an advisor or a guest, but as my ally?" He didn't blink. "I already have." Her eyes searched his, and for the first time she saw the flame in him buried deep, but burning all the same. Later that night, the War Council gathered in the Great Pyramid. Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei, and now John. Maps were rolled out. Ships marked in red, enemy movements tracked like pieces on a game board. John studied it all. "If we strike Yunkai's fleet before they reach Meereen, we cut off their supply. But we'll need speed, surprise." "They have numbers," Grey Worm warned. "We have dragons," Daenerys said flatly. John looked at her, half smiling. "I've never seen a dragon in battle." She looked back at him, deadly calm. "Then you'll see fire fall from the sky." Tyrion poured himself wine and muttered, "7 hells. This is either going to be brilliant or burn the whole damn coast." John stepped beside Daenerys, both staring down at the map. 2 worlds once apart, now locked together. The bastard and the dragon. And the first real war was just beginning. The ships of Yunkai cut through the waters like a swarm of black beetles, sails billowing with the wind of ambition and vengeance. Their captains believed Daenerys Targaryen was weak, a foreign queen distracted by northern strangers and the bloodshed within her own city. They believed Meereen was ripe for the taking. They believed wrong. Jon Snow stood on the edge of the Great Pyramid, the sea stretching far beyond. the scent of salt mixed with smoke in the air. Beside him, Drogon soared through the skies, his wings casting monstrous shadows over the city. The dragon's roar cracked the heavens, and Jon flinched slightly. No matter how many times he heard it, it never stopped feeling like the sound of the end of the world. Daenerys stepped beside him, her armor shining in the morning sun. It wasn't gold or polished for beauty. It was dark, simple, built for war. Her silver hair was braided tightly behind her head, her face unreadable. "They're less than a day out," she said. "They think they'll catch us unprepared." Jon nodded. "Let them think that. Just make sure Drogon hits their sails first." She glanced at him. "You're not afraid of the battle?" "I've seen worse than ships and sellswords," Jon muttered. "But what I've never seen is what happens when dragons make war from the sky." Daenerys' eyes narrowed. "Then ride with me." Jon blinked. "What?" She turned to face him. "You want to see it? Come with me. Drogon can carry two." Jon stared. Every part of him said no. He'd never flown, never even dreamed it. But then again, everything about his life since leaving the Wall had felt like a dream, and she was looking at him like she already knew what his answer would be. Moments later they stood on the platform. Drogon lowered his massive head, eyes locking with Jon's. For a second the beast growled low, the kind of sound that could paralyze a man. But Jon didn't flinch. Ghost had taught him how to look monsters in the eye. "Good," Daenerys said. "He accepts you. Feels more like he's considering eating me." She smirked, climbing onto the dragon's back with grace. Jon followed, slower, gripping the ridges along Drogon's back, his muscles tense. When she offered her hand to steady him, he took it without hesitation. "Hold tight," she said. "Don't fall. I'm not diving to catch you." Before Jon could reply, Drogon leapt. The world dropped beneath them. Jon's heart slammed into his ribs as the wind ripped through his hair. They soared over Meereen in seconds, the buildings becoming blurs of sand and stone. Jon gritted his teeth, clutching the dragon tighter. He wanted to scream, not out of fear, but from sheer disbelief. The sky wasn't made for men. And yet, here he was. Then they saw the enemy. Dozens of ships, black sails and iron hulls, approaching from the east. Daenerys pointed. Drogon growled, and then all hell broke loose. Flames erupted from the dragon's jaws, a torrent of fire that turned the ocean red. The first ship ignited instantly, men screaming as they jumped into the boiling sea. The second tried to turn, but another blast of fire ripped it apart mid-air. Jon stared in awe. This wasn't just war, it was power, raw, ancient, and terrifying. The kind of power the old kings had only whispered about. Below, Grey Worm led the Unsullied in a coordinated strike from the docks, ambushing the few ships that made it to shore. Meereen, battered as it was, fought like a city reborn. But as Drogon circled for another strike, Jon noticed something. "Dany, look, those three ships on the right, they're hanging back." She squinted. "Command ships. They're not attacking. They're watching, waiting, like they knew you'd use Drogon." Her face hardened. "They want to trap him." Suddenly, from below, two giant scorpions, massive crossbows, mounted on decks, emerged from the hidden hulls. Jon shouted, "Dive!" Now, but it was too late. The bolts fired. One missed. The other struck Drogon's shoulder. The dragon screamed, spinning violently in the air. Jon's grip slipped, his heart stopping as he nearly tumbled into the sky. Daenerys clutched him, yelling something he couldn't hear. Drogon, bleeding and furious, veered off toward the cliffs, smoke rising from his side. They didn't crash, but they weren't winning anymore either. On the ground, Grey Worm's forces pushed forward, but the tide had shifted. Yunkai had come prepared. And now the Dragon Queen bled. As Drogon landed roughly in the hills outside Meereen, Daenerys jumped off, checking his wound. Jon dropped to the ground, still shaken, still burning with the memory of fire and steel. "We can't fight them in the air anymore," she said bitterly. "No," Jon agreed, panting. "But maybe now it's time to fight them like Northerners." The wind howled across the scorched hills outside Meereen. Drogon lay wounded, his wing torn and shoulder leaking thick, dark blood. Daenerys knelt beside him, her hand on his scales, whispering softly in Valyrian. Her eyes burned, not with fear, but fury. Jon stood nearby, staring back at the smoke rising over the bay. The water burned, ships cracked in half, screams echoed faintly through the wind. But Yunkai hadn't been broken. Not yet. They had planned it. Lured her out, wounded Drogon, tried to take her from the sky. But Jon Snow had fought in worse places, with fewer chances, and he hadn't come all this way to watch fire die. "We need to fall back," he said. "Get the Unsullied off the docks. They'll be overrun by nightfall." Daenerys didn't move. Her hand was still on Drogon, his breathing rough, one eye open and watching her. "He saved us," she whispered. "He always does. He needs to heal," Jon said gently. "And we need a plan that doesn't rely on dragon fire." She stood slowly, brushing ash from her armor. Her jaw was tight, her voice colder than before. "I will not run." "No one said run," Jon replied. "But fight smarter." She looked at him, a sharp glare forming until she saw the dirt, the blood still drying on his clothes, and the way he wasn't shaking from fear. He wasn't afraid of her, or her dragons, or the war. "What do you suggest?" she asked. Jon walked a few paces, eyes fixed on the burning bay. Yunkai doesn't expect a northern strategy. They've seen dragons. They've seen Unsullied. What they haven't seen is what I learned from the wildlings. Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "You want me to send savages after their generals?" He smiled faintly. "No. I want to send ghosts." That night, under the cover of darkness, Jon gathered a small group, Unsullied scouts, 2 freedmen who knew the back routes into Meereen, and Grey Worm himself. No banners, no armor that shone, only silence. They moved like shadows through the ruins of the outer city places abandoned during the siege. Yunkai's forward camps had pushed in too quickly, too confidently. They left gaps, weak points. No guard expected the Queen to attack without dragons, but that was the plan. In the hills, Daenerys stayed with Drogon. The dragon rested, eyes half closed, though his tail still twitched with the pain. The wound was bad, but not mortal. She knew he would rise again, but it killed her to wait. Tyrion approached quietly, carrying a flask of wine and a mind full of doubt. "You let him take command?" Tyrion asked, leaning beside her. "I let him do what he does best," she said, staring into the dark. "Survive impossible odds." Tyrion poured himself a cup. Sounds familiar. Back in the ruins, Jon and his team crawled through the rubble like rats. They reached the edge of a supply camp near the harbor, rows of crates, barrels of black powder, siege tools, and most importantly, the 2 massive scorpions used to wound Drogon. The camp was lightly guarded, cocky, careless. Jon gave the signal. Silent blades slid across throats. Grey Worm's men moved without mercy. No war cries, no banners. When they reached the scorpions, Jon lit the fuses. Then the night exploded. Fire erupted in the middle of Yunkai's supply camp, sending smoke and chaos through their lines. The scorpions shattered, crates of powder burst like thunder, and in the confusion, Jon's team vanished into the dark again. From the hills, Daenerys saw the flames rise and felt her chest tighten. "He did it," she breathed. Tyrion raised his cup. "I may owe your ghost a drink." At dawn, the tide had shifted. Yunkai's remaining ships still floated, but their crews were shaken, their supplies gone. The scorpions that had once kept Drogon grounded now lay in pieces, and from the docks of Meereen the freedmen gathered, emboldened by the night's attack. Daenerys stood atop the pyramid once more, Drogon beside her, his wounded wing folded close. He growled low as the enemy ships began pulling back, fearful of another ambush. "They came with iron and fire," she said aloud. "Now let them taste their own fear." Behind her, Jon walked up the steps, tired but alive. Dirt streaked his face, but his eyes were lit with something she hadn't seen before. "You lit the fire," she said. He nodded. "Now it's your turn to finish it." She stared at him. Then at the horizon, the time for warnings was over. The Dragon Queen was done waiting. The morning air hung heavy with ash and sea salt as the last of the smoke curled over the shattered harbour. The enemy fleet still lingered, but now it drifted like wounded prey, sails torn, hulls scorched, morale shaken. They had come to crush a queen, but instead they'd seen their power burn from within. From the top of the Great Pyramid, Daenerys stood tall in her black and crimson armor, her hair braided with threads of silver and blood-red silk. Drogon crouched beside her, his injured wing tucked tight, his eyes glowing like dying embers. Rhaegal and Viserion circled above, their shadows sweeping the city like dark omens. Jon Snow stood behind her, one hand resting on the hilt of Longclaw, the other clutching the thick leather strap of his travel cloak. The northern chill never truly left him, even under the Meereen sun. But now it blended with something else, purpose. Daenerys turned to him, her voice calm but steeled. "I will not wait for them to strike again." "You won't have to," Jon said. "They're scared. Their formation is broken. If you hit them now, it ends." Grey Worm approached from the stairwell. "Our men are ready. The freedmen have volunteered. Even the slavers' former guards are offering their blades." Jon raised an eyebrow. "They'll fight for the Queen now?" "They'll fight for the city," Grey Worm replied. "And they'll die for her if they must." Daenerys stepped forward, looking over the harbour once more. "Let them watch what it means to challenge fire." She turned to her blood riders, her commanders, her dragons. "Today," she declared, her voice carrying like thunder, "we burn away the last chains. We do not fight to conquer, we fight to finish what we started. And when the smoke clears, they will remember what happens when they try to break the unbroken." A deafening roar answered her, Rhaegal and Viserion descending as Drogon rose once more, slower but no less deadly. Jon hesitated, then stepped closer to her. "You ride with Drogon again?" She met his gaze. "Always." "I'll ride with you," Jon said. Daenerys looked at him, surprised. "You would climb back onto a wounded dragon?" He gave her a half-smile. "I've ridden worse into battle." A flicker of amusement touched her eyes, but it vanished quickly. Moments later, they soared into the skies once more. Drogon's wings beat hard against the wind, Rhaegal and Viserion flanking them in the air. Jon held tightly behind her, the heat of Drogon's body pulsing beneath him. Below, Meereen's troops began their charge through the remains of the slavers' beach camps. Yunkai's fleet scrambled to realign. Signal horns blew, men shouted orders, but it was too late. Flames rained from above. Drogon's fire split the sky in two, engulfing the largest ship in a storm of heat and light. Rhaegal dove straight through the sails of another, tearing it apart with a savage burst of fire. Viserion swept low, his flame dancing across the deck of a command ship, forcing men to leap, screaming into the sea. From above, Jon watched it all unfold, chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying. It wasn't war, it was punishment. He glanced at Daenerys. Her face wasn't cruel, but it was distant. Her eyes locked on the enemy, her hand steady on Drogon's back. She was a queen in full, a storm given shape. And for the first time, Jon wondered if the world was ready for her. The fleet began to retreat, turning from battle, some even scuttling their own ships to escape. Meereen's forces cheered from the shore as the last of the invaders fled into the eastern horizon. When Drogon finally landed on the cliffs above the city, his chest rising hard with exhaustion, Daenerys dismounted slowly. She stood in silence, staring at the blackened harbor, at the wreckage of men who thought they could break her rule. Jon stepped beside her. "It's done," he said. She nodded but didn't smile. "No, it's only begun." He frowned slightly. "The bay is yours now." "The bay was always mine," she replied. "But now the world will know what I am." Jon studied her for a long moment. "And what are you?" Daenerys turned to him, her eyes fierce yet tired. "Fire and blood. But I'm trying to be more." They stood there together, side by side, the queen with dragons and the man who rode one despite not knowing why the beasts trusted him. And neither of them said it aloud, but both were thinking it. They weren't just allies now. They were bound by war, by fire, and something more dangerous than both trust. A bond the world might not survive. The days after the battle were filled with smoke, silence, and rebuilding. Meereen stood, but it stood bloodied. The harbor was littered with wreckage, the scorched remains of ships and men floating in dark water. The slavers had retreated, their fleet shattered, their pride broken. Inside the Great Pyramid, the throne room had been turned into a war council chamber. Maps lined the tables, scribes moved like ghosts between conversations, and Daenerys sat at the head, listening but not speaking much. Victory tasted bitter now. Jon Snow stood near the back of the room, half in shadow, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The northern blood in him still didn't fit in with Meereen's marble halls and silken banners. But he belonged here now, at her side, whether anyone liked it or not. Tyrion was the only one bold enough to say what the rest whispered. "You've changed," he said one evening, when Jon stood alone near the open balcony, watching the ships burn in the harbor. Jon didn't look at him. "War does that." "No," Tyrion said, stepping closer. "This isn't war. This is something else. You came here a bastard with a warning. And now you ride dragons into battle with a queen who trusts no one but listens to you." Jon didn't answer. Tyrion leaned on the railing. "People are starting to ask why the dragon didn't burn you." Now Jon looked at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Tyrion said carefully, "that fire doesn't spare bastards, unless they're not truly bastards." Jon's eyes narrowed. Tyrion straightened up, voice lower. "You should know something. When I was in Westeros, I read some old records. House Targaryen. They weren't all wiped out. Some were hidden, protected." Jon's stomach turned cold. "Your hair," Tyrion said, "might be black, but your blood. I'd bet my gold hand it runs hotter than you think." Before Jon could respond, a soft voice cut through the tension. "I already know." It was Daenerys. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes locked on Jon's. "I had Varys send word to old allies in Westeros, maesters, lords, spies. One name came back." She held a scroll in her hand. "Lyanna Stark," she said. "Your mother." Jon blinked. "No," he muttered. "That's not possible. I'm Ned Stark's." "No," Daenerys said gently. "You're his nephew." The words crashed into him like a storm. "Your name isn't Jon Snow," she said, walking toward him, her voice steady but soft. "It's Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born in Dorne, hidden to protect you from Robert Baratheon." Jon's world tilted. He stepped back, heart pounding, breath shallow. "That's a lie," he whispered. But it wasn't. He knew it. Somewhere, deep in his bones, he had always known he didn't belong, that he wasn't just a bastard, that the wall had been a cage to keep something hidden. "I'm not a king," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't want a throne." "But you have a claim," Tyrion said, watching him closely. a stronger one than hers. Jon turned to Daenerys. She looked calm, too calm. "You knew this," he said, voice hoarse. "I suspected," she replied. "I wanted to hear it from you, but I saw how Drogon looked at you. He only bows to blood." Jon's hands clenched. "So what now, you kill me?" She stepped closer, so close her breath touched his face. "No," she said, "I don't want to kill you, Jon. I want you to rule with me." He blinked. "What? You said it yourself," she whispered. "This war isn't over. The true war, the one for the living, is still coming. When it reaches Westeros, the people won't follow me easily. But you, they will follow you. A Stark, a Targaryen, a man who fights for no crown." Jon shook his head. "I never wanted power, which is why you're the only one who deserves it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, fire and ice truly stood face to face, tied by blood, bound by fate. But behind them, the whisper of war hadn't stopped. Across the sea, Westeros still stirred. The White Walkers still marched beyond the wall, and in the shadows of Meereen, a figure listened, a former slaver, scarred but alive, who had fled the harbour during the chaos and now carried news back to Westeros. The Dragon Queen and the Northern Bastard were rising, and the old world would burn for it.